Jessica Dawson was once the forgotten daughter, quiet, withdrawn and overshadowed by her picture-perfect family. Richard, Linda, Andrew and Emma Dawson were everything Maple Ridge admired. But behind their flawless facade, Jessica was building a secret no one could see coming. In one night she murdered them all, not for money, not for revenge, but for something far more disturbing. This is the twisted story of how a desperate hunger for recognition turned a daughter into a killer. The Dawson family lived in a quiet cul-de-sac in Maple Ridge, a small suburban town where everyone knew each other by name. The neighborhood was the kind of place where kids rode their bikes until dusk and families held block parties in the summer. In the middle of it all stood the Dawsons' immaculate two-story colonial house, white with navy shutters and a trimmed hedge that bloomed with roses in the spring. From the outside, it was everything a family home was supposed to be: warm, safe, and welcoming. Richard Dawson, the father, was a successful real estate agent known for his firm handshake and big smile. He sponsored little league teams, donated to local fundraisers, and was always the first to help a neighbor shovel snow. His wife Linda was equally admired, volunteering at the school library and organizing food drives through the church. They had 3 children: Andrew, a college freshman on a baseball scholarship; Emma, a bright 16-year-old who played violin and dreamed of going to Juilliard; and Jessica, the oldest at 26, who had recently moved back in. Jessica's return to the family home raised quiet questions among neighbors. She had left for the city nearly a decade ago, chasing a dream of becoming an artist. At first, her updates came regularly: posts about gallery shows, photos of her in city cafes, captions filled with ambition. But after a while, her presence faded. She stopped updating social media, stopped reaching out to old friends, and eventually stopped coming home for the holidays. Then suddenly she was back in Maple Ridge, living in her childhood bedroom like she'd never left. Her parents explained it simply. Jessica was taking time to regroup after a rough patch. They said she was focusing on herself, trying to get back on her feet. But her siblings noticed the change. Jessica kept to herself, rarely came out of her room, and barely spoke during meals. She no longer painted. Her easel stood folded in, the corner gathering dust. Sometimes Emma would hear her pacing late at night, back and forth for hours. Andrew, home on break, found her staring out the window once, unblinking, as if she didn't even know he was in the room. Despite the strangeness, the Dawsons tried to treat her return as a new beginning. Richard fixed up her old car so she could get around. Linda baked her favorite chocolate cake on her birthday, even though Jessica barely touched it. The family included her in their routines: movie nights, Sunday brunches, walks in the park. But Jessica always seemed like a guest rather than one of them. To the outside world, the Dawsons were still the Golden family, smiling at church, waving at neighbors, and posing for photos in their well-kept backyard. But inside the house, something was quietly unraveling. Jessica's presence, though silent, was heavy. Something in her had shifted, and while no one knew what it was, they could all feel it. The home was still beautiful, still full of laughter and tradition, but beneath the surface a storm was quietly building. It started as an ordinary night in Maple Ridge. A slow drizzle blanketed the neighborhood, the kind of rain that muffled sounds and made the air feel still. Most families were curled up indoors, watching television or getting ready for bed. The Dawson house was quiet too, or so it seemed. From the street, nothing looked unusual. The porch light glowed faintly, the curtains were drawn, and no sounds came from inside. But just after midnight, things took a dark and sudden turn. A neighbor across the street, Mrs. Langley, was the first to notice something was wrong. She had gotten up to take her dog out when she saw a faint orange flicker in one of the Dawsons' upstairs windows. At first, she thought it was just a light left on, but within moments, the flicker grew. Then came the smoke. It wasn't thick, but it was visible, curling slowly into the night from the back of the house. She hesitated, unsure of what she was seeing, until she heard a loud bang, like something heavy falling or being slammed shut. That's when she called 911. Emergency responders arrived within minutes. As firefighters prepared to enter the home, police officers attempted to make contact, knocking on the doors and calling out, but there was no answer. The front door was unlocked. What they found inside stopped them in their tracks. The air inside the Dawson home was heavy with smoke and something far worse, silence. One by one, the responders moved through the rooms, discovering a scene more gruesome than anyone could have imagined. Each member of the Dawson family was found dead in different parts of the house. Richard was in his study, slumped over his desk. Linda was in the kitchen, her lifeless body sprawled near the counter. Andrew and Emma were found in their bedrooms. The cause of death varied, some blunt force trauma, others more precise and methodical. There were no signs of a break-in, no shattered glass, no forced locks, nothing was stolen. It was as if the killer had moved through the house with purpose and control. The most disturbing detail was that Jessica was nowhere to be found. Initially, authorities hoped she had escaped the attack. Maybe she had fled in panic, running for help or hiding in fear. Her absence could have been a sign of survival. But as they began to examine the scene more closely, that hope began to fade. There were no calls made from her phone, no signs of a struggle in her room. Her belongings were untouched, yet her bed hadn't been slept in. Something about her absence felt too clean, too intentional. As daylight broke over Maple Ridge, word of the tragedy spread quickly. The Dawson home, once a symbol of perfection, was now marked with police tape and surrounded by flashing lights. Neighbors gathered in stunned silence, struggling to process what had happened. Theories swirled, but no one had answers. The only thing that was certain, the Dawson family had been brutally murdered, and the one person who might explain what happened had vanished without a trace. 2 days after the murders, Jessica Dawson's car was found abandoned at the edge of Coldwater State Park, nearly 70 miles from Maple Ridge. The discovery deepened the mystery. Her small sedan was parked awkwardly, half hidden behind tall grass near a rarely used trail. When investigators opened the doors, they were met with a chilling scene. Bloodied clothes were shoved into a backpack on the passenger seat. In the glove compartment, they found an old half-burnt notebook with pages torn out and scribbles barely legible. One photo, crumpled and damaged by moisture, showed the Dawson family in happier times. Each face had been crossed out in black. Ink, except for Jessica's. Nearby, under a pile of branches and leaves, officers uncovered more of Jessica's belongings: a prepaid burner phone, over $3,000 in cash, and a forged passport bearing her image under a false name. Everything pointed to a carefully planned escape. This was no victim on the run. This was a fugitive. Detectives started tracing Jessica's movements in the weeks leading up to the murders. They found security footage of her visiting multiple hardware stores across different towns, purchasing gloves, duct tape, lighter fluid, and zip ties. None of these stores were in Maple Ridge. She had gone out of her way to stay under the radar, never visiting the same place twice. She paid in cash and wore plain, oversized clothing. No one remembered her, and no one would have thought anything of her purchases at the time. Back home, the forensic team began to piece together the crime scene. Despite the chaos inside the Dawson house, there were no signs of forced entry. Whoever had committed the murders had moved through the home without panic, without hesitation. Jessica's fingerprints were found on several items linked to the killings, including a flashlight smeared with blood and a matchbox in the kitchen. There were no other fingerprints belonging to any outsider. All signs pointed inward. Delving into Jessica's history revealed troubling layers. She had dropped out of art school 3 years earlier after failing her 3rd year. Friends from college described her as intense, withdrawn, and increasingly erratic. Some recalled how she spoke often about being destined for something greater, how the world didn't see her value. After returning home, Jessica had isolated herself almost completely, refusing to attend family events, spending most of her time online, and scribbling in journals late into the night. One particular online forum became the focus of attention. Jessica had been active on a site dedicated to anonymous confessions and rants. Under a pseudonym, she had posted cryptic messages for months, frustrations about her family, comments about starting over, and repeated claims that they'll only understand when it's too late. The final message appeared just Hours before the murders. Tonight I'm setting myself free. It was becoming clear to investigators that Jessica hadn't snapped in a moment of madness. This was calculated. This was deliberate. The motive, however, still remained unclear. Why would a young woman turn so violently on her own family? What was she running from, or running toward? The answers were buried in the wreckage of a life that had been unraveling for far longer than anyone realized. As investigators sifted through Jessica Dawson's scattered belongings, one item stood out among the rest: the charred remains of a spiral-bound notebook retrieved from her car. Though many pages were too damaged to read, some fragments survived. Scrawled in large, messy handwriting were phrases repeated again and again. "They never saw me. I was supposed to be more, and this is my beginning." The notebook wasn't a diary. It was a manifesto. Page after page exposed Jessica's spiraling thoughts, revealing not only her resentment toward her family, but also a fixation on fame, recognition, and reinvention. The deeper investigators dug, the more disturbing the picture became. Jessica had spent the last year immersed in online communities dedicated to self-promotion, viral fame, and influencer culture. Under various usernames, she submitted videos to talent competitions, lifestyle shows, and discovery platforms, promising a chance at stardom. She created dozens of fake identities, each one a version of herself she believed would be more appealing. An edgy musician, a trauma survivor, a life coach. None of her attempts gained traction. She remained invisible in the very world she longed to conquer. Psychological evaluations later revealed a dangerous pattern of narcissistic behavior, worsened by isolation and years of perceived failure. Jessica saw the success of her younger siblings, Andrew's sports achievements, Emma's musical talent, as a personal attack. In her mind, her parents had invested in them and abandoned her. She believed they had clipped her wings, forcing her into a life of mediocrity when she was meant for greatness. What shocked investigators most was that money was never the motive. Jessica had no interest in inheritance or property. In fact, she left the family's valuables untouched. Instead, her journal and online activity pointed to something much darker, a plan to orchestrate her own twisted form of rebirth. By murdering her family and disappearing, she believed she could create a story compelling enough to finally make the world notice her. She wanted headlines, documentaries, public intrigue. She imagined herself as a mysterious survivor, later re-emerging to tell her side of the story, shaping a narrative in which she was both victim and hero. This delusion ran deep. In another notebook found under her mattress, Jessica had written mock interview questions and answers, crafting an image of a misunderstood woman who had overcome tragedy. She even drafted a book outline about healing from the unthinkable. It was clear she had rehearsed every detail of a future where she would be admired, pitied, and praised. Not for her art, but for her suffering. Forensic psychologists noted that this wasn't a case of sudden psychosis. Jessica had spent months, possibly years, building this fantasy. The murders were simply the act that would set her plan in motion. It wasn't revenge in the traditional sense, it was transformation. A way to shed her failures and emerge in a new identity, one powerful enough to command the attention she had always craved. The tragedy of the Dawson family was no longer just a brutal murder case. It had become something far more unsettling, a story of how deep-seated delusion, mixed with resentment and a hunger for recognition, could drive someone to commit the unimaginable. 6 weeks after the Dawson family murders, Jessica Dawson was captured in a small motel on the outskirts of Clearwater, a sleepy town 3 states away. Her arrest didn't come from a dramatic police chase or a breakthrough tip. It came from a clerk who noticed her face looked oddly familiar. Jessica had dyed her hair a dull brown and cut it short. She wore oversized clothes and kept to herself. But when she paid for a room using cash and handed over a fake ID, the clerk had a feeling something wasn't right. That night, after seeing Kai, the true crime segment on the news, he made the call that ended Jessica's time on the run. When officers arrived, Jessica didn't resist. She was calm, eerily so. Her small room contained a duffel bag, a burner phone, and several disguises. There were maps with circles drawn around cities and airports, a journal filled with vague instructions, and a stack of pre-written letters addressed to media outlets. Each letter painted her as a lost soul trying to survive. She didn't confess. She didn't speak. She simply stared as officers led her away. Back in Maple Ridge, the town was still reeling. The Dawson house had remained sealed for weeks, a painful reminder of the horror that had taken place. Police tape fluttered in the wind, and no one dared walk near it. Once a home filled with laughter and family traditions, it had become a monument to tragedy. The few who had known Jessica before her return were stunned by what she had done. Many refused to believe it at first, but the evidence was undeniable. Jessica's fingerprints matched those on the murder weapons. Her face appeared on surveillance footage buying the supplies. Her own writings detailed motivations, preparations, and the desire to vanish. During the trial, the prosecution laid out everything, every detail of her plan, every step she took, and every choice she made. The defense claimed mental illness, arguing that she was not in her right mind and had suffered years of untreated psychological trauma. But experts testified that Jessica had been methodical and deliberate. She knew right from wrong. She simply didn't care. The jury deliberated for less than 2 days. Jessica was found guilty on all counts, 5 counts of first-degree murder, with special circumstances for premeditation and cruelty. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She showed no visible emotion as the verdict was read, her expression the same detached calm she had worn since her arrest. After the sentencing, the Dawson house was torn down. The property stood empty, overgrown, and silent. No one wanted to rebuild there. The town of Maple Ridge quietly moved on, but the case never truly faded. Jessica's story became the subject of documentaries, podcasts, and books, but it wasn't fame in the way she had imagined. She wasn't celebrated. She was studied, an example of obsession turned lethal. In the end, Jessica Dawson became known not for her art, her talent, or her ambition, but for the destruction she left behind. Her name was etched into history, but not as she had hoped. Her legacy was a chilling reminder that sometimes the deepest darkness hides behind the most ordinary smiles.